they develop these really intense relationships with other people that, it's a time when they're young and they have time, right? And so I think the greatest commodity isn't a thing. It is time, really. And someone says the greatest gift that I can give someone is my time. And I think there's a quote that somewhere along the way that someone said to me, and it was like, do I have time? I have all the time in the world, because they have all the time in the world. They don't have to be anywhere. Yeah. They're not doing anything specific.
Micheal Joseph.
Hello.
Did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah.
So you guys talked a little bit when I was checking my internet connection issues. You have been to Germany, haven't you?
I have been to Germany, yes. Yeah. So Munich and Berlin, Dresden as well, and then that's pretty much it, if I can remember correctly. So 2 separate trips, one when I was young, one when I was much older. So
how young have you been?
I was probably like at 13, 14 maybe, when I was in Munich. My mother was born in Munich, and so
we went
kind of to trace our roots, to see where she grew up. And then I remember being in the Hofbrauhaus when I was really young, and all I could have was the Coca-Cola with lemonade in it. I remember that really specifically. And then the Glockenspiel, and I don't remember too much. I was young, but Berlin was amazing. I went with my sister, and we had a great time. It was wonderful. So we loved the street art and the young vibe there, and obviously the history and the art, and so we had a great time.
When what age were you when you went to Berlin?
So I was in my early 30s, probably, I would say.
All right.
Yeah.
How old are you now?
I've crossed the 40 barrier. So
really,
yeah,
man, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know I hear that a lot. So
I hear that a lot too, but I think it's a good thing, don't you think?
Good thing.
I think the other way around would suck.
I heard that the best tip is just to say you're much old. You just have to say you're much older, and then people say, "Oh, you look pretty young." So that's the best trick.
Right.
Just
have to.
So let's start with that. And what age did you discover photography?
Good question. So it's kind of my father was an artist or is an artist, and but not in the sense that he does painting and drawing still. He did it when he was very young, and then went to school for that. And then he ended up going into advertising in New York City. So when I was growing up, it was very natural for him to, leave pens, pencils, markers, paint, everything around for me to play with. And then going through school, I always did art. Going into college, it was part of my studies. So I did art all the way through. It was just actually never photo that I did. I took classes in figure sculpture and painting and drawing and all of that, but photo was the last thing that I really tackled. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do it was because it would get me out of an apartment, a house, an office. It forces you out on the street. That's what I loved. And also to interact with people, which is also what I love as well. So that, if that answers your question, but I think I've been doing, it's probably 15 years now, I would say. I started taking courses at a school that no longer exists here in Boston called the New England School of Photography, taking everything from studio portraiture to, how to photograph products like an iPhone, technology and shiny objects and things that everyone goes through because they all have they're all problematic in their own way. still life and all of that, all the way to what was it? Just street photography, which I loved. I took that class repeatedly. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into photo. It was to get me out and not be stuck in a studio just with a paintbrush and a canvas, which can get tedious. And I wanted to go out and see what was there. So yeah.
That's interesting because it's basically like ingrained. So these things you love about photography are ingrained in your series as well. And I can see the connection there. Yeah, I think I found you because you were on a short list or a winner's list of some lens culture award, like
Yeah.
I think 3 or 4 years ago. I have this on my PC, like check these guys out. And I was like, okay, let's see. And then I saw your project Lost and Found on there. And that really catched my eye. And I will share my screen to show some pictures of these series. Can you tell us a little bit about the series for the viewers, what it is about?
Yeah, so Lost and Found, I can tell you the history of the project as well. It has an interesting story to where it all came from, but what you're looking at it's portraiture.
Can you see it? Sorry,
yeah.
Can you see it? Is it working? Yeah, okay. All right.
It's portraiture, and all of these portraits are made on the street in real time. A lot of times people think it's a studio, but it's not. And what these are I call them kids, but they are travelers. Travelers is a subculture in the United States and also around the world, but specifically focusing on those in the United States who leave home for many reasons when they're young as 12, 13, 14, more average would be 16, 17, 18. They leave home because their family situation is not great and they need to escape that. So essentially a forced runaway, or they are seeking some type of adventure and the type of prescribed life that is typically American of, you go to school, you get a good job, you work lots of hours, and then you have kids, and then your kids do exactly the same. They just don't feel like they're cut out for that same continuous, what we call a hamster wheel, or continuous cycle that people go through. And so they leave seeking to see more than they're used to, and in some ways grow up on the road. So it's either a family situation that drives them out, a yearning for adventure. And for some people, historically, a lot of it was work, but for some people, they just grew up in families like that, where they traveled from place to place looking for jobs, and then they would keep moving, and there was no such thing as a stable home or a settled home. So I think that there are many other reasons, but that kind of encapsulates part of who these people are. And there's a rich history of this in the United States. It started out in the 1930s in what we call the Dust Bowl era, where there was a depression and people went to go look for work. So they would hop on trains as a free way to move around. And even parents would encourage their kids to do the same. And that's when you hear of the typical American hobo. And then from there, it kind of evolved into what we call the beatnik generation, which is kind of the Jack Kerouac on the road, the person exploring, looking for adventure and freedom. And then from there, you have the hippie subculture, which is in the 1970s in the United States, which is very much focused on, San Francisco and what came out of there, and just in general. And then you translate that moving forward into the 90s, which was the punk squatter subculture of New York City and the East Village. So that also, you can see bits and pieces of that when you look at these kids. And now today, this is kind of the modern day version of what that is, and we call it the traveler. There are other terms, dirty kids. You may hear that, or train hoppers, or train core, or there's a lot of different variations of what they're called, but they prefer the word traveler. It's the least derogatory version of that, I would say, because they're generally looked down upon. So that's what it is. They move around the country either by freight car, freight train. They have, some of them have cars, so they just move from place to place with their car. Some of them will hitchhike. It's really any means necessary to get from point A to point B, as long as they're moving. So they don't really stay in places for extensive periods of time. They do work. They'll do work on farms. They'll do small labor jobs, washing dishes, being a cook, like really anything to just kind of make some money and move along. The subculture, however, is fraught with substance abuse, and so a lot of them have anxiety, depression, mental issues. So there's a great positive to it because there's freedom that comes with this, and the ability to explore oneself, to find people that are like themselves, and we call it the found family concept, where they're searching for a new family, so to speak. But in all of those wonderful things, seeing parts of the country other people don't get to see, or seeing all of the country, which some people never see their entire lives, comes with risk and danger, of course. So I don't mean to romanticize it, but at the same time, they are beautiful people in their own right. And I guess that's the best way I could explain it. So a lot of them, unfortunately, over the period of time, will die from accidents or drug use, or and abuse, or whatever happens to be. So some of the people that you see are not with us anymore, and some of them are very much settled and off of the road. And so everyone's story is a little bit different, but sometimes the path is similar. I hope that explains it.
Yeah. And how did you bump into this subculture? What was the initial, like, did you meet one guy and then went from there, or how did it all happen?
So good question. Going back to when I was taking classes, I was taking studio portraiture classes and also street photography classes at the same time. And my studio portraiture class instructor said, "What do you want to get out of this class?" And I said, "I want to do this, but I want to do it on the street." And I'm not even realizing that street portraiture was its own kind of genre of photography. Lots of people have done street portraiture really, really well. And it was just something that I didn't realize was a thing. So I set out and decided I was going to start a project where I would just meet people that looked interesting and make portraits of them on the street, whether they were good or not, and then continue to just refine that as time went along. But I would use the lighting aspects of what I was taught in studio portraiture class. So the best compliment someone can pay me is if they think that the photograph was made in a studio, because that's essentially what I was striving to do, but using natural light, and the same kind of lighting concepts, but using the sun or shade or whatever I could find, really. But I don't carry equipment with me. That's a question I always get. It's only me. I don't have a team. I don't have a ladder. I don't have anything really that I'm bringing with me, except for what I can find along the way. So what happened is I was shooting, making portraits of different people all over when I was traveling in the United States. And I photographed a gentleman in Las Vegas who was pretty striking to me. I hopped out of a cab while I was in Las Vegas. My friends were heading to downtown Las Vegas. I don't know if you've ever been to Las Vegas, but there's kind of two parts: the major strip, that's what you see on TV, and then the downtown part, which is a little more gritty, looking for, maybe some interesting faces that I could find. They were headed towards a museum that's kind of harbors these old signs that came off of hotels from back in the day. But I kind of hopped out of the cab. I met a gentleman. I made some portraits of him on the street, and then shook his hand, said thank you very much, and then I was on my way, and that was pretty much it. When I got back home, I looked on the screen and I was like, wow, this is a great portrait for me, for what I was aiming for. And I was drawn to that. And I put it as part of my portfolio that I could carry around on my phone whenever I was trying to talk to people. As time progressed, I would find other people who knew who he was. And so it was really interesting because I would be in New Orleans and I would flip through and someone would go, "Oh, I know that guy. I was just with him." "What do you mean you were with him?" "Well, I was just with him." "Okay. And well, what's his name?" Because I had been trying to find him and I had different versions of what his name might be. I tried to find him on Facebook, but I couldn't. And someone did give me the correct name, but it was all one word squished together instead of spread out. That's why I could never find it. So to make a long story short, I discovered through him this subculture of travelers, and because he happened to be one of the most well-known ones, which is really interesting from the get-go. So a lot of people knew him or knew of him, and then as the story continues, I ended up years later running into him in Chicago by happenstance, and I wasn't able to make another type of portrait because I had a different type of a camera. I had a rangefinder on me, which is not what I used to shoot these. And so we took a picture together, but then I had to run to catch a plane. Like, it was just a very random period of time. And then 3 months later, I was in New York City and I saw some travelers in Times Square and I tapped them on the shoulder to make a photograph and showed them the pictures again. And this gentleman's name, he went by Knuckles. And he said he's in Union Square Park right now here. And so I hopped on the subway and went there as fast as I could and then met up with him again. So 3 meetings later, I was finding myself surrounded by a lot more of these travelers. And that weekend in particular, I spent both Saturday and Sunday, I think it was, with the travelers and photographing them and learning about them. And that was kind of one of the more important launching points of the project. So the story continues, but that's how I really got involved. It was really just by approaching one particular stranger who happened to be in the subculture, and then realizing that this was, all around me. I just didn't realize that it was happening. That's one of the things that people find surprising, is that, these travelers are everywhere. You may walk by them or not, or ignore them, or you may see them and wonder who they are, but they're always constantly moving and they all know one another. It's just a very intricate network of people that is living and moving around the United States.
Wow. Like, how many people are they? Can you give us a number? Like,
I don't know. And I don't know if anyone knows. I would say thousands at least.
wow.
I've probably photographed at least 300, I would say, over the course.
Yeah.
I mean, this, for me, the first photograph I made for this project, or what would become the project, was in 2011. So October 2021 marked 10 years of the project, which I never anticipated like that would go on so long. But I kept growing and evolving with the subjects that I photographed, sometimes photographing them multiple times over years, and going from trying to figure out what the culture was. Like, I was in on it, in the sense that, it was exciting for me the same way it was exciting for new people to be out on the road, and then seeing what it was about, and then realizing that, some people were overdosing and dying and having to kind of mourn the loss of some of the subjects that I photographed. I wasn't obviously as close as one could be, in the sense that I wasn't traveling with them, getting, super intimate, but behind the scenes, I was chatting with them on the phone, texting, voice, using Messenger and things like that to keep in touch with them. And then I would run into them either randomly or know that they would be in a particular location around a certain time, and we would meet up as if it was a small reunion in some way. And so not only them, but their families as well, I really became involved in their lives, and over the course of years, and have followed a lot of them to figure out what they're doing. And it's really exciting to see people thriving. It's really exciting to see some people settle and have families, or turn their lives around and go to school and, and settle down, so to speak. Some of them settle down and they go right back on the road, a year later, because they realize that conventional life is just not for them. So I think that gives you an idea, I would hope.
Yeah. Have you ever been drawn to hitch the train with them and go with them, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the portraits that I make is I eliminate the scenery. I mean, they're all done on the street. There's a
Yeah.
couple, if you look on my Instagram page or at the very end of my website, I think there's one where you can see how I'm making these. They're doorways,
Mhm.
walls, really anything I can use to get some type of blank background. But I'll do that on purpose, and I do it to eliminate the street and eliminate that, you seeing their environment, because the reality is that they're moving around constantly, and so I don't want to pin them down to any one location because that wouldn't make it right. The other thing
Yeah.
too is they're looked down upon quite often, so I want people to be able to really look them in the face. That's why a lot of them have direct contact or gaze. So for me to go out on the road isn't necessarily really important
Yeah.
because I'm not going to be photographing it most likely. Of course, I'd be drawn to photographing it because I'm sure I would catch some beautiful things along the way, sunsets and tunnels and places that people don't get to see because these trains do go around sides of mountains and through mountains and from what I have seen through them, some really amazing backgrounds. But um, I would love to see the adventure of it and see what they're drawn to. It's also not as exciting as you may it may appear. There are lots of really boring points where they're just sitting around waiting for a train to come, or sitting on the train reading, waiting for it to get somewhere. So there is some beauty and excitement in it, but also not so much at the same time. It is illegal as well, and so considering that I don't want to have a criminal record, it's probably not the best thing to do. I told myself when I finished the project, there was one traveler in particular that really wanted me to go out with him for just a short ride from point A to point B. Essentially, like I would probably have to contact the train company and ask them if I could do that, just kind of get permission, instead of risk, which sounds lame, but instead of risking getting a criminal record, because you are trespassing on federal property. It's not,
Yeah.
a lot of this is not necessarily the train company's land or tracks. It is really um, you know it is very much illegal and very much dangerous. So the freight cars are carrying product, and some of it is product that has an expiration date to it, and if they have a traveler on it or someone that gets injured or dies or something happens on that train, they have to stop the train, and now all of a sudden whatever was supposed to make it to where it was going is not anymore. So you do have to see the other side of it too.
Yeah,
So
sure.
yes, I've thought about it to just kind of seal it off, but um, I don't know if I'll ever really do that. It's not that I don't want to, it's just I would have to do it in a way that I could almost guarantee that it wouldn't be problematic for me moving
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah, understandable. And what you said before, that with the studio thing, that some people think it's in a studio because you eliminate basically the background with placing the people in front of walls, I think.
Yep.
And for me, when I first looked at the series, like Richard Avedon's series about the American West was all over the place for me in my head. So because he did also this with the white background to eliminate all the surroundings, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Yeah,
yeah.
which is fine. No, that's wonderful to hear. Um, yeah, I think he set up like a white sheet or something like that
Yeah.
in
Yep.
some instances. So for me, like the picture you're looking at right now, that's basically in a against a doorway. This is in Texas. Yeah, against a doorway that was in that's okay. That was in like a corridor between buildings, just some way where it would spill in enough light from both sides, but keep him in the shade. And then I found like a nice textured dark door that I could blur out enough to make it look that way. So yeah, a lot of it's experimental. Like in the beginning, especially, I was figuring out the lighting scenarios, and I would know in certain instances how it would end up looking, but in others it was always a bit of a guess in the beginning. And then the more familiar I became with shooting in this way, the more I knew how to get something to look consistent over time, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really consistent and really like, I don't know how to say, like raw, but I think there's a lot of like nakedness in the pictures too. Like you can say that about the technique, how you shoot it, but also about the subjects. There's a lot of naked skin with other tattoos and stuff. Is that something you instructed like doing this, or are these people just walking around like that?
So most of the time I don't shoot in cold weather a lot because there's a lot of reasons, but it's uncomfortable. Most of these kids are traveling around to warmer places as the temperatures get colder. So there's a migration around to find the next kind of warm space. So a lot of times, like in New Orleans, it is, especially around June. I think that was one of my shooting sessions that I had been there, which I don't prefer. It's brutally hot. I mean, to the point where I'm dripping sweat within a half an hour. It is extremely hot. And so they have overalls and they just take their shirt off, or they're walking around shirtless. They don't really care. A lot of them, there's some that just walk around with no shoes on, period. So there is that kind of rawness to it, depending on where they've been. Sometimes they're coming right off of the train, so there's dirt everywhere. Sometimes they've hooked up with a friend who's living in the area, and they have what they call a squatting house, and so they're able to get a shower, and they happen to look a little bit more clean at the beginning of the week, but by the end of the week, if I'm there the whole week, the dirt goes right back on. So yeah, I mean, I'm not instructing them, but in some instances, like there was a guy who had overalls on, and I said, "Oh, do you have any interesting tattoos?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I have one on my stomach." That was the guy that you saw, the ship tattooed on his stomach. So for people like that, that was a learning lesson, because all of a sudden there was this amazing tattoo that had a great mantra or phrase on it that spoke to the project. And I was like, had I not asked him about that, I would have missed completely. And that's what really makes the picture alongside of his face and the rest of it. So I started asking those questions, like, do you have any specific tattoos or scars anywhere? And someone would be like, oh yeah, I have, my lung got punctured. And so they would take their shirt off to show me that there was a full scar, from their chest all the way down. And those things are important because they're revealing. So it's a combination of both of that. And I think, when someone has their shirt off, or there is like kind of a rawness or a nakedness to it, it seems more vulnerable and more exposed. And so that is unintentional, but intentional at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. That was kind of learned over time. Sometimes I would shoot someone with a shirt on, and it would have like a band's name across it, which still they are in there. But other times I would have them take it off, and because I didn't want the words in there, so to speak, or it to seem like it was, if it said Thrasher or, whatever it happens to be, I wouldn't want that in there because I think it's distracting in a way. So I would have them take it off. And then when I would develop those portraits as time went on, I would realize that those were a little bit more revealing and vulnerable. So I kind of went with those.
Like the pictures we're now looking on are all like pictures, but I noticed on your homepage there's a lot of text too. Like, how important is that for you to give text with the series?
So that's a great question, because I will be working towards a book of this project, which is unofficially announced. I'm not going to make an announcement, but I'm working on something. And I ended up taking a documentary masterclass where I was encouraged to continue working on the project, of course, but to go out and try and collect some stories, because I knew the stories, but I wasn't recording them. So I started doing a lot of audio so people could hear what these kids sound like. And it's very clear it's on the street because with the audio, you can hear cars going by, what have you. But the stories were actually really unique and important in collecting information about the subculture and trying to find the commonalities, but also unique stories at the same time. One of the things that's most surprising about the subculture is that the subjects are actually very bright. And that's what's not necessarily seen. Some of what they write, which they can send to me later via phone or messenger or whatever it happens to be, even back through the back end of Instagram, and that's not how I started off doing it, but it became easier that way eventually over time. That they're actually brilliant writers, very thoughtful. They have a lot of time to sit and think. They're thinking about life, existentialism, what they're discovering, what they're learning, what they're finding. So the writing became pretty important, actually. And so I find that the stories are really important. It's not really what I set out to do, but at the same time, I found that people really responded well to the stories, and I found them to be brilliantly written. So there will be
I think so too.
Stories included along with the photographs. I think that became more evident as time evolved, especially when people talk about their emotions or why they do it, or their or specifically what they found at the end, like what happens 10 years later. That took a lot of time to figure out. If someone's hitting the road and they're only 1 year out, they don't have a lot of perspective. But someone who's been doing it forever, they have huge perspective on what they're finding, and they have a lot of things to say about the country because they've seen all of it. So I think the writing is important.
I think there's some crazy stories.
Yeah.
But let me see.
Okay. And
I just started a recording.
It's pretty fascinating. I mean, Germany is much, much smaller than the United States. And then you just happen to bump into these people and they're, oh, I know this guy. And all of a sudden you get to know more and more people. And it's just so fascinating. You just went out and was like, okay, I'm going to take my portraits outside of this studio. And then you end up with a series that's 10 years old, and maybe there's coming a book with text and stuff. And it just fascinates me all the time.
There's other interesting parts of the story too, which is you'll find interesting. I was invited to give a talk on this topic in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte, it was a place called the Light Factory, which is kind of like a gallery space. They do photography workshops. There are a couple of these around the country, and they're very nice people. It's a great environment. So long story short, the original traveler that I photographed in Las Vegas had settled, his family's in Charlotte, and he had settled down in Charlotte, training to become an electrician. But we had talked a long time ago that his dream was to get a passport and travel the world. And before I could get there to give the talk, he was able to get rid of any type of criminal record that he had. They're all like small misdemeanors and nothing major, but they just need to be taken care of. And he couldn't do it in terms of settling down. So he got his passport and he got on a plane, saved up enough money, and then ended up traveling the world. I'll save like the story of what happened to him later on. But so before I could even get there, he was gone again. Ironically, that night, his mother and one of his and his aunt, I believe, were in the audience when I was giving the talk about him, and then came up to me at the very end and then invited me to their house to have dinner with them, which I gladly accepted. So it's very, bizarre or weird, very funny almost that I would meet someone randomly on the side of the street, and then years later be in his family's house across the other side of the country having dinner at their dinner table. Yeah, mind blowing. And I just kind of kept going with it and going with it and going with it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
And
So.
what I read basically all of the texts you have on the homepage, like the little stories. And one thing like stood out to me. It was one reason, one why the person is doing it, and it's the search of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it fascinating because, like, when Sebastian was saying that Germany is really smaller than America, and even Europe is small compared to America, and I don't think we have some stuff like this. I don't know. We have like, I think I see it as another form of pilgrimage too. Like we in Europe, we have this planned like pilgrimages, like the Camino de Santiago or something like that. Like, but it's really like not that free when you think about it, because it's like a set way and you do it and you're basically safe. But this is really more
Right.
like a completely different thing, exactly. And I find that fascinating, the search of himself. So, and
well, it goes along with, in the United States, there are different regions, like the Northeast with New York City, Boston, where I am, Washington, D.C. They're very, there's a lot of art and theater and education and history, because this is where the original colonies were. So all the universities, the older more prestigious universities, or a lot of them, are up in the Northeast area. And the feeling of the Northeast is go, 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 very type A personality. And then you make your way to the South, and the South is very slow. People take their time. There's a lot of it's less transient, in the sense that people really settle there for longer periods of time. There's given the history of how the United States was formed, there's a lot of differences between the people that live in the South and the people that live in the North. And when you look at the politics, it's very divided. Then you go across west to places like California. Same thing, it's very relaxed, and there's no change of season. You go to middle America and you get a different type of person there. And so I think people maybe grew up in an area that is not how do I explain it? Not really who they are, right? So the people or the town that they're in, or the area that they're in, doesn't match who they want to be either. And so they see images of New York City, or they see images of the South, or they see, what Los Angeles looks like, and they want to experience that and kind of figure out where they fit and who they are. And so, I grew up outside of New York City, so for me, it's very familiar, but I could only imagine someone who legitimately grew up on a farm seeing New York City for the first time and just having their mind blown, because it's not normal. It's very specific. But then their eyes may be open and realize, like, hey, wow, like this is who I am. This is what I want. Like, city life is for me, and I love the vibe of this, and why, I was raised on a farm, but that's not who I really am. So that it's very much true, and it gives them the space to think and interact with other people, and they're doing it at a young age where they're forming their identity. So there's a lot of that comes with it.
Do you think that's the biggest payoff of the thing? Like, if people get out and find themselves, is this the biggest payoff? And I'm interested, it's been 10 years now, and what was your biggest thing you've learned or taken out of the series, like working on that project?
So their payoff is, I think, they develop these really intense relationships with other people that, it's a time when they're young and they have time, right? And so I think the greatest commodity isn't a thing. It is time, really, and someone says the greatest gift that I can give someone is my time. And I think there's a quote that somewhere along the way that someone said to me, and it was like, do I have time? I have all the time in the world, because they have all the time in the world. They don't have to be anywhere.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything specific. And so they have the time to form these really intense friendships or relationships. And they are unique, and they are organic, and they are not forced. It's not that you went to school and these are your classmates. It's you find the people that you like and experience and learn where they came from and what they like, and you're traveling together, experiencing new things and having adventures, and your mind is constantly producing serotonin and giving you that high almost. A lot of them feel like it's like their drug is traveling versus anything else, and having new experiences. Everything's always new. So I think that's really what they find along the way mostly, is these intense relationships that they take with them forever, for good or bad. And then just having these amazing experiences where they can look around and say, this was for me or this wasn't for me. Some of them realize that everything, one of the stories that someone wrote was like, everything is really just the same, to be honest. When they pared it down, they said, honestly, everything is really just the same. It's just the backdrop changes. People are the same. Human nature is the same. And they can't come, some of the conclusions are not as amazing or romantic as you would think that they are. But they're able to say, this is for me and this isn't for me. I think in some ways, that's exciting for me to see in that long period of time, someone who was new on the road, and see kind of where they end up. And yeah, so they're not all great, romantic stories, but some of them are, have really nice endings. For me personally, what I saw was how little people were able to live with and still enjoy their lives, like how much you really don't need. And I know that sounds really kind of like, I don't know, like it's said a million times before, but they're really living with nothing. All they have is the backpack that they have and what they're traveling with. And if they lose something along the way, they know that they'll find something moving forward. There's a lot of reasons why I call the project Lost and Found, and that's one of them. It's just their backpacks are stolen from them, or they're sleeping somewhere and it's on the street or in the woods or wherever it happens to be, and they're constantly losing things and finding things, literally physical things, but also themselves too. So they travel with a certain pack of people or a group of people, and then they go out on their own, or then they run into someone 2 years down the road. So for me, it was realizing that we really do need very little in life. And then one of the things I think the pandemic for everyone kind of pointed out was that how important human interaction is in real life, in real time, and having experiences, and how detrimental it is to be sitting in a home or a cube or wherever you are. If you're in a city, a tiny apartment, just cramped, stuck with a computer screen, and how everyone thinks it's so amazing in the beginning and realizes that actually really it's not. So
it is amazing in some ways. Like, for instance, we can talk over the globe now about your project, so that's amazing, but it's nowhere near like real interaction.
No. Yeah, it's convenient and it's nice. It's a form of connection in some great way, but it really will never replace it. You can walk into a room and read the room. You have all those nonverbal cues and just a feeling that you get, or an excitement that someone brings, when you meet them or whatever it happens to be. So that's with these kids, they're really every minute of the day is an experience. It's battling the weather when it starts to rain, or it's very hot, or they're moving around, or they're working in on a farm, and then getting money and moving on, or trying to meet up with a friend across country, or hopping on the train and seeing a sunset. Like it's very unplanned in some ways, and they really just don't know what they're gonna find along the way as they continue. So it's I think there's a bit of human nature in that, in the sense that we probably started out that way and ended up in these societal constructs. And so I feel like there's a point that they have, like we weren't really meant to be stuck behind a computer or staring at our phone all day long. That never existed, so there's a lot of that I kind of agree with as I started to learn, what they were learning along the way,
I think that's a beautiful ending for our talk. Or do you have something on your chest burning, Sebastian?
That's just the only thing I was thinking about is I just totally look at the same, or my look is exactly the same. I think what we exchange today is the exchange of freedom for security, and this whole corona situation makes it more clear. The more fear we have, the more control everything has over us. And I think it's always a good thing between security and freedom. And I think for me, these people, the travelers, are really free. And as I looked through all the pictures, and I really looked the travelers in the eyes, and I was like, man, I really want to meet these people. They have something in their eyes. It's so wild and free, and also warm and encouraging. And I was like, man, I have the most boring life in the world. And they could talk like hours over what they have seen, because I live more in security than in freedom. And it really made me think about myself just by looking at these pictures and looking at these people. And I was really fascinated. And I had so many questions. Where were you? What did you see? What's the backstory? And what did you learn? Because seeing these people makes me feel like I'm missing out. Normally it's Instagram, but you have FOMO and stuff, and
Right.
feel you're missing out. But when I look at these people, I'm like, damn, I'm just wasting my life.
Yeah.
And that's a cool thing when I look at the series, that I really think about it and feel it, and I can feel these people, and I want to connect with them. I'm just genuinely interested in meeting these people and travelers, and just hang around with them, because I think they're more interesting than most of the people I see daily on the street. And I'm really thinking about it right now. So I'm really thankful to know this series now, and I'm looking forward to hopefully for a book or for more text, so that I really can get to know these people. I think that would be really wonderful.
Sure. One of the things that I'll point out as a photographer is when, with this subset of the population, with these kids, when they're looking into the camera, they're very comfortable, and they're very honest.
That was a question I had too. Sorry.
That's okay. They let their guard down very easily in some ways, because they allow that, and you can look into their eyes and you can read it. And when I start to work on other projects and someone is uncomfortable with themselves and they feel guarded, then it doesn't come through, and I can see it. I can see the moment where the facial expression drops, and I'm looking through. And I can also see it when someone's very giggly and uncomfortable and they can't do it. On top of that, I'm shooting this on the street where people are walking by, and for someone to be able to go into themselves with all of the distraction around themselves, is very fascinating to me. And you can sometimes see the moment, where they go internally in their head, and then everything drops and it comes through. So that's who they are. They're not afraid to, they've been, a lot of them say they've been so far to the bottom, there's nothing left to lose, that's when you start really learning what there is, because you have nothing to hide, you have everything to gain. I don't think a lot of us would want to be on those very low bottoms that some of them end up in, but from a photography aspect, especially portraiture, it's, there are those moments that you can capture where the thought comes through, or their person comes through.
I think there are two pictures. She calls herself Fight Master, and they're both together. It's like 110 and 111, I think, on your webpage. And the first one was taken 2014, and where she's like really girly looking and like innocent. And the next picture, like 2 years after that, she's really bold and courageous. And it's just so fascinating to look into her eyes. And she's like really straightforward. And you're like, oh, she means business. And that's fascinating. I mean, 2 years, and this is completely changing. There's so much strength in her eyes. This really blew my mind. It's really two of my favorites.
Yeah, they are very, I mean, you have to be very strong-willed, and you have to be a strong person to be able to, it's not suffering, but it's eliminating everything that you have, and then just to discover what really lies underneath. At least for each individual person is a little different, but there is quite a bit of strength in that. And I find that as well. One of the other things that I'll mention too is there's a lot of face tattoos that people have. It's just part of the culture. And it's funny how in the beginning it was something that no one did, and then all of a sudden in pop culture it became very trendy for rock stars to have tattoos on their faces, which it seems very bizarre to me. But in the beginning, it was off-putting, as just any other person might think it would be. And now I don't even see it. If I meet some travelers, I don't even register the face tattoos. It's become so common, not common, but so normal to me that I don't really register that anymore. But for them to have those exterior faces and what they're wearing, if someone's able to come up to a traveler and introduce themselves and say hello in a kind way, regardless of what they look like on, in the front, then they know that person is okay and that's a good person. So it's almost like a screening tool or a way to filter out, who's good and who's bad, because they can read fear. They can read fear so fast. Just being on the street, they can read people so quickly, because they're dealing with so many different types of people that are all over the country. So
that was a question I had when I looked at the pictures. Are they like interested in being portrayed in the public? Like, you exhibit them too? Are they like aware of this and interested in it, or how do they deal with that?
That's a great question. So initially I didn't know how that was going to really kind of, I didn't know how that was going to go over. But they knew that I was doing it for art purposes, a lot of them. And then, it got picked up on one of our major news networks here in the United States. And I thought to myself, either I'm going to go back out on the road and people are going to tell me to, curse me out and tell me to go home and that's it, I'm done, or it will continue further. And it ended up being okay, and they were okay with it. And I think they want to be understood and want to be recognized, but I still think they want to fly under the radar. But just like anyone seeks acceptance in some way, shape, or form, I think that's a form of acceptance for them, for their community to be legitimized in a way that's not looked down upon either. So one of my goals when I realized this became to be able to have the work seen so that people could understand that this exists and this is real, and also the more that it is out there and it exists, the more it becomes part of, you know, their being there becomes more of the history of, you know, what is the United States, or what is humanity and what has happened, and they are a culture. And so in a way I ended up becoming like a documentarian of that culture, which I didn't necessarily expect to do. But that's what it became. So they are very excited in some ways to have that happen. And I've even had one or two of them go to a gallery and show up in the exact same clothes that they were wearing in the photograph, and scare the hell out of whoever happened to be there. You know, when someone in the photograph comes to life in front of you, it's probably a little awkward. But yeah, I don't think they mind it too much. A lot of them, there's a little bit of backlash about, you know, they feel like, you know, I'm making tons of money off of this. And as any artist will tell you, that's generally not the case. Even with, yeah, even with a book, most people don't make any money on books. The book is out there to be out there and for people to enjoy. It's not a huge money-making industry in some ways. It costs a lot of money to put together and to produce. And most photographers have to raise quite a bit of their own money to even get a book made. So, you know, I'll get every now and then I'll get a backlash of like, where's my residual, or how come I'm not getting paid, or whatever it happens to be. You know, but you know, I help them out as much as I can, specifically the ones that I know really well. And I've definitely spent a lot more money than I've made making this project. I can tell you that. I've gotten a lot of grants along the way, which is very helpful. But you know, it's not. I'm not. You know, I'm not making an enormous living off of this project. So they don't see it that way, probably because they're anti-capitalism a little bit. But that's okay. I'm okay with it. And I think they do want to be seen.
Yeah. And we know that there's a book coming. We don't know when, but we know it's coming. And do you have anything other than that planned, like exhibition wise, or how can people find you, follow you, see the series?
So, I mean, I actually started, or I got in the habit of posting on Instagram more than I did updating my own website, which is kind of bizarre. But I think Instagram is a great way to read the stories, because I do put them all there. You can kind of sift through that and read directly what the person had to, or the traveler had to say. So that's good. The exhibits, there were a lot of them for a period of time, and then, you know, COVID happened and everything's slowing down, and so there isn't a lot of it out there right now. I would say, you know, pay attention to the Instagram page if anything's coming up in your area. But it's been in most of the United States. It was actually just in Arles, France. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. ARLES, as part of one of like a photo festival exhibit that they have there. So there were two hanging there. But the full scope of body of work, the last time that was exhibited was about a year ago in New York City, in Soho. But yeah, I mean, I would love to. There's one hanging in the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, and here, and I don't know if it's still up on the wall, but that's there. So little bits and pieces, major exhibitions, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, awesome. I hope everything's gonna be a little bit more like cleaning up in this year. Micheal, thank you so much for talking to us about this amazing series. Really enjoyed our talk, and we're gonna let you off the hook now.
Sounds good.